Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of chats Mark, Ellen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyour-ear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
Well, welcome to another edition, and someone that I last interviewed almost exactly 40 years ago in his flat in Shepherd's Bush. I know, it's astonishing. Who's just published his memoir, In One Ear, which is the story of the Cocteau Twins and other musical adventures. It's the story of the Bella Union record label he started. It's the story of all those records that we own that his father had a hand in, and the story of the time that he went on stage following the Ramones with the Cocteau Twins. Very nice to see you again, Simon. How are you doing? Simon Raymonde.
Very lovely to see you. And I don't probably properly remember the 40th anniversary of our last conversation, but I do remember that flat. Very well.
I remember that flat so vividly. Yeah, it was 1985. It was a piece for Smash Hits, controversially. We were covering the Cocteau Twins because I loved them so much. And you had a wonderful collection of framed original Tintin book covers on the wall.
Yeah, I actually still a big fan. So I still collect all those old. Still got all those old books, original ones. So strange how we managed to keep.
Where do we find you now?
Yeah, so I live just near Brighton in a place called Saltdean, just on the coast. Moved down from London about 12 years ago, and wish I'd moved down here 32 years ago. It's just so great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I know it very well.
I love it.
Really good. Well, look, there's tons to talk about, but maybe we should start by asking if you can remember the first record you ever bought.
Oh,
can you remember what the first single was or whatever you ever bought?
Yeah, the first single, it was probably something very uncool. I would think it was, if memory serves correct, it was a Beach Boys single. Oh, which one was it? God Only Knows.
All right.
And I think my sisters had a few. Not a drinks, that is, a few singles.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of madly in love with this band, probably about age 10. I think my parents gave me some pocket money. I went down to Woolworths and bought that. And then I think I bought the Jackson 5 album. What was it called? Get It On or something. It was terrible. It was definitely one of their worst records ever. But, it had a cool die-cut sleeve, which I've still got it somewhere. So those were my two purchases on the first day in Woolies.
And the first band you saw, can you remember that?
Genesis.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What was your impression of that?
I didn't really get it. I went with my brother, and it was a bit too clever, I think, for me at that point in time. And it was probably only a couple of years before the punk thing happened. So that's when music started to make some sense for me. But
well, look, we should ask you about your dad at some point. In fact, the title of the book refers to him as well. Ivor and Me, Cocteau Twins, Ivor and Me. And your dad, I mean, you discovered sort of later on in life that he'd done all sorts of things, been involved with the Walker Brothers and Dusty Springfield and producer and arranger and everything. But when were you first aware of what it was that he did? How old were you?
Well, I think I was always aware, I remember when I was about 6, Scott Walker came to the house, and I really didn't know who he was or the significance of who this person was, but I could tell something special was going on because my sisters, who were probably 7 or 8, 10 years older than me, they were both like,
fainting.
Extremely excited about the visit. So I knew something was up. And I was in my bedroom when he came. I sort of banished to the bedroom, keep that child out of the way. And I remember looking out the window and seeing this sort of beautiful man in the garden with this lovely hair and this white billowing shirt in the wind. And I could tell something very special was happening, and that this was an event that should be memorable for everybody. But that's about it. I wasn't really aware of his music at all. And I think Petula Clark came to the house once, and I think that's about it. So I knew that famous people were occasionally at the house, but I didn't really understand it because I was more into football and, with playing out with my friends at that point. So I didn't get Dad's career. I knew he wrote I Only Want to Be With You, co-wrote I Only Want to Be With You. I knew he worked with the Walker Brothers and all that stuff as I was growing up. But I think the significance of it really didn't strike me until much, much later, which is extremely sad because he died young, and I never really sort of got the chance to ever discuss his career with him, which is an awful waste, isn't it? Because he must have had such incredible stories to tell. But I was very lucky that my mum sort of recorded him talking about his life, a few years before he passed away. Basically telling his life story. So I was able to get these tapes and these transcripts after she died, and able to kind of go through them and be as amazed as I was. So that really...
And those are reproduced in the book. That's right. They're really fantastic. I mean, there's a bit where he talks about working with Joe Meek, which is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Yeah, because I was growing up, in the punk days, so Joe Meek was... quite a hero, really, obviously because of his, the terrible way he died, and all the work that he did as a pioneer in sort of recording, sort of out of the studio system. Probably one of the first people, to make hit records. Certainly the first to make hit records in the bedroom of a flat in Holloway Road. So he was a bit of an icon to us. So I didn't even know that my dad was working with him until 20 odd years later. It's right, very strange.
So did you get free records as a child? Did he bring stuff home? No, Elvis Costello always talked about this because his father was obviously sang with the Joe Loss Orchestra. And so he always used to have loads of demo records lying about the house as a child. Do you remember anything like that?
Well, I remember the demo records. I've got a load of them here in the house, sort of acetates and stuff like that. Dub plates and whatever, but it didn't really mean anything to me because they were the sort of things that were very heavy, and you're not really supposed to play them on record players. They were just sort of brought back from Decca or EMI or wherever he was working. So I didn't really understand that stuff, and it certainly wasn't boxes of Dusty 7-inches lying around, sadly. But no, as I say, I was really just not tuned in to it at all. It was like, oh, that's what Dad does. In the same way that, I don't know, if your dad was a plumber and he brought home some tools, he was just sort of it was just normal. I wasn't quizzing him going, no. Oh, tell me about today's efforts in the studio with Dusty. What happened? What was the string section like? I wasn't doing any of that, which is a regret for sure, because I probably could have got some fantastic information. But as I say, I was just too disconnected from an era, really, a generation where parents didn't really hang out with their kids, didn't really talk to their kids in the same way that we do now. My kids, I would like to call them sort of mates as much as anything. But, in this day, children were sort of put up in the bedroom, and kept out of the way, speak when you're spoken to kind of thing. Yeah. So I think that was sort of very much how it was in our house.
There's a bit where you talk about 1979 as being the big year for you. I think you were 17. And all the music that you discovered and the bands you went to see. Just tell us a bit about that, because that's a major change for you. That suddenly you become incredibly involved in music.
Yeah, so 17 is very important, I think, 79. We'd been through the punk thing, which is where I sort of developed my love for music properly. So that was sort of when I was 14. Obviously it's significant. You're just, discovering all sorts of things at 14, aren't you? Like girls and music and all that sort of stuff. So obviously coming up to London, seeing a load of the punk gigs in that period was incredibly, influential in later life. But as we all know, the kind of the 76, 77 punk era, whilst it was explosive and fascinating and exciting to be witnessing and part of, musically, it sort of burnt out pretty quick, didn't it? Because it wasn't particularly interesting after the first sort of rushes of excitement and the newness of it all. Once it became almost like a high street thing where, you've got where it just sort of went all wrong, didn't it? All the sort of hope and the expectation of this cultural revolution sort of just dissipated somewhat. So thankfully, 79 was the year where, the music that was coming out from this period was so much better than the music that we'd been inspired by in the first place. Certainly that was my view of it all, and very artful.
Artful, adventurous, more complicated. Because you talk about groups like Wire, don't you, particularly?
Yeah, there's Wire, there's the pop group, Linton Kwesi Johnson. There's like so much different stuff. Obviously, being in London, being in West London, where I was, there was this mix between punk and reggae, which was, I think really important, certainly important for me. I mean, my very first job after the Beggars Banquet shop, I started working age 18 in the Beggars Banquet record shop in Earls Court, in South Kensington, sorry. And then when the shop closed down, my next job was working in an all reggae hour price in Shepherd's Bush Market. Can you even believe such a thing existed?
No, go on. How did that work? Did they have a sign saying just reggae?
No, it's just because at Shepherd's Bush Market was purely like reggae and West Indian culture. Wow. So I think it was obvious for that shop to only sell that, but it was an hour price shop, which of course, as a chain of record shops that became, quite bland in the end. It was a special place to work. So obviously, I was discovering so much music all in this crazy time, not just the punk stuff, but then the post-punk stuff, and then Joy Division came along, and it was really, really the most brilliant time. And I don't know whether it's because 17 is that kind of year where you're really on a journey of self-discovery with music. Your ears are open to a bit more. I'm not sure whether it's so significant for me, or is it, is everyone really, is everybody's 17th year the year where you really kind of get into music big time? I don't know. I've not done a big lot of research on it.
I think it tends to be, actually.
Yeah, I think it probably is.
We're just going to pause for a second, because we're both so interested in record shops, and Dave worked in a record shop for a long time. And I just think it's so interesting that your first record shop that you worked in was the Beggars Banquet one.
Yeah.
Talking about. And then you went from that, via a couple of other things, to being pretty much head of the branch of Our Price in Charing Cross, which was a completely chart shop kind of where you were forced to sell Phil Collins records. Just firstly, tell us a bit about the Beggars Banquet shop, because I mean that must have been. Did you spend a lot of time trying to convert people to buy certain things? And I mean, you must have been a very interesting clientele.
Oh, honestly, well, that shop is the reason I'm sitting here talking to you now. There's no doubt about it. It is the catalyst for everything that happened in my life, and I wouldn't be here without it. So, okay, so you picture this. It's just on a very straightforward street, Kenway Road in South Kensington. Nothing amazing about this road at all. Quite inconsequential. And then on this shop, you have the Beggars Banquet record shop, and above the shop are the three record labels that obviously are, that we know and love. Beggars Banquet, now known as Beggars, 4AD, which is now part of Beggars, even 40 odd years later, and Situation 2. Now, Situation 2 was a sort of probably a small and lesser known label, but I signed my first little band, the Drowning Craze, got signed to this label whilst I was working in this shop. So it was very sort of a closed little community, but everyone sort of knew each other. And the amazing thing about this shop that differentiated it from all the other shops I've ever been in is that all the artists who would come to visit the label, and that's a considerable amount, given what 4AD and Beggars were signing back then, Gary Newman, the Associates, Bauhaus, the Birthday Party, some pretty fantastic names, would all have to walk through the shop to go upstairs to the office. There was no other way into the office. So this very weird thing happened when my future band, Cocteau Twins, arrived at the shop very early one morning before anyone was in at the label, and sort of rapped on the door while me and Steve, the manager, were unpacking boxes. And turned out that they'd come down to London to deliver the cassette of their very first record to 4AD, the label that had expressed, an interest in signing them. And, I obviously met them and talked to them. And then over the course of the next year or two, while my own band is sort of not really happening. I became friends with them, and then I somehow ended up in their band. And that's how my story sort of starts, in this record shop. The shop eventually closed down after, I don't know, probably a year or two. And I was at a bit of a loose end because I hadn't joined the Cocteau Twins at this point. This is pre that. And I went for a job interview at Our Price, which was, local to where to lots of shops in the London area. And amazingly enough, got a job, and within 6 months was managing the Charing Cross Road branch, and then I went to the Kings Road branch before that. I was at the Tottenham Court Road branch for a while. Yeah, it was a fun.
But it's brilliantly described in the shop, the cultural difference being in the beggar's shop, and then suddenly you're in a place where it's a big chart shop, isn't it? And you seem to find it personally affronting to have to sell music that you don't like. And the key thing, the big record at the time was "Hello, I Must Be Going" by Phil Collins, wasn't it?
Yes, I do tell. I feel bad about that now, because a few people said, "Oh, Phil's so lovely," and I do feel like I sort of threw him under the bus a little bit in my book. I didn't really mean to, but I was just kind of.
He'll survive. Don't worry.
Sure
he's all right.
He'll get through.
Yes,
he's had worse.
I wasn't a fan of the music, right? That's there you are. I've said it. That's not a crime. But so his record had come was number one on the chart, and it would sell something like 900,000 copies that year. And it was the big number one record, and the area manager came round to sort of do his monthly inspection and check everything was all right in the shop, because it's a big old shop. It's right next to Foyle's on Charing Cross Road.
Right, yeah.
And you probably remember it in the back of your minds there. It was a big unit, and there was a massive big basement downstairs where the new shops that were opening up, like the Tottenham Court Road branch, half a mile up the road, were all the staff were in there preparing to open up the shop, so getting everything ready in our basement. And what happened was, I didn't spot that. I didn't realise that the record had actually come in, because we were out of stock for like 2 weeks, and the area manager was like, "Where's the number one album in the chart?" And I was like, "I don't know. I've ordered it 3 times. It hasn't come in yet."
Oh dear!
It turns out that it was at the bottom of the stairs.
Oh God!
In the basement for where this other shop was being prepared. And of course, he marches down there and shouts out, "Raymond!" as he opens the box. And I'm like, "Oh dear Lord." So I got demoted immediately from manager to assistant manager, and then went home kind of very, annoyed with things, because I sort of still at that point thought it's not my fault, and then the next day, Robin from Cocteau Twins called me up and asked me if I'd like to join the band. So it was like, okay, well, this is definitely fate.
Phil Collins did you a favour.
He really did. Really did. I love him. Thanks, Phil.
I remember so vividly when the Cocteau Twins started that there are very few groups that the press become absolutely besotted with. Bell and Sebastian's another one, Prefab Sprout, these groups where they feel that this is almost too beautiful, this music, for the world. And I found my old interview that I was talking about, the Smash Hits interview, and I quoted to you the things that people said. I said, your music described as sonic cathedrals, swirling sepulchral shards of sound that patter like raindrops against the windows of your mind. And which in the book, I think you talk about it as flitting through the ether on gossamer wings. That just seems so funny. It was a very precious attitude towards the Cocteau Twins.
Yeah, it was strange for us, for sure, because we just thought we were just regular blokes, regular people, and it was always strange that people saw it in that way. I mean, in hindsight, of course, it's incredible to have adjectives and hyperbole like that, but it was a bit strange because we didn't think we were that amazing. And I think when you're showered with praise like that, it can it's better just to be a bit humble about it and not be like, yeah, we are amazing, aren't we? So I think we were just sort of quite shy and awkward still at that point. We certainly were absolutely rubbish at interviews. I do apologise if we came across badly at the time, because
not remotely, but it struck me that you were around at the right time, because were you around now when so much is dependent on self-promotion and the ability to draw attention to yourself.
Yeah,
Cocteau really weren't capable of doing that at all.
No, we would have totally failed on that front. And of course, 4AD was a kind of cool label, had a great press team there who probably helped shield us from some of the stuff, but yeah, no, everyone was super nice in the press, really. I mean, there was a few people that found us a bit, felt like we were sort of avoiding the question and didn't know the answer and felt it was all a big scam. Why does it sound like it does? Well, we don't really know. Oh, come on. It sort of felt like we were hiding something from
Yes.
But the reality,
yes.
Well, the reality was we really didn't know why it sounded like it did. I mean, I think you'd have to be an idiot to say that Elizabeth Fraser is just an average singer. She's one of the great singers of all time with a very, very, very unique voice. And I think that was the thing, really that was people were focusing on. What is she singing? What is it about? Why does it sound like that? It's just so out there. And
I've got to ask you, because you talk about writing the songs and the way the songs develop is really interesting. You have these rules. The Cocteau Twins have rules that you're not allowed to go to the studio with any song prepared. It has to be something that you spontaneously invent, and that no demos are ever made. And I thought it was all really interesting. But you don't discuss Elizabeth's lyrics. And I think a lot of the time people were just mesmerised by the idea that she appeared to be singing in a completely incomprehensible language of her own. How did you feel when she came in and started, singing?
The same as you, I think. Same as everyone else, which is why I didn't feel educated enough to give any great insight into her lyrics. Because if anyone should be doing that, it's her, and she will or she won't in the future, or if she ever feels like it. But I think, I just used to listen to it in the same way that a fan would listen to it. Like, eyes wide open, mouth wide open, like, wow, what is this woman doing? It's so crazy.
But did you ever ask her, what are the songs about?
No.
Or did they just not matter?
No, I didn't, because it just, everything was, I can't really describe the period probably as effectively as I should, but we were not articulate people in conversation with each other. And I think I sort of say that in the book a little bit, that really the way we communicated just on anything is through the music we made. We just didn't really ever have conversations other than, shall we do this gig we've been offered? Yes. And who's going to hire the van? And you take care of that. It was just all very sort of businessy, logistical stuff. We never sort of sat down and chatted like kind of old mates. I don't know why. Maybe just because that's the culture that we were in.
Well, that isn't true of so many groups.
I think it is true of so many bands.
Is that groups do not talk to each other.
They don't talk to each other.
Yeah, no, we never did. Not until it was, too late, really. And I think that's probably why. I mean, I didn't have the balls to say to Liz, what's that all about? What's that one about? I sometimes might sneak a peek at the lyrics on her music stand, sort of when I walked past or in the morning before she went to the studio, and I would have a quick look. So the lyrics aren't a complete mystery to me in terms of the ones that made sense and the ones that are actually just perfectly straightforward, English language, because a lot of them are. And I think what differentiates Elizabeth with a lot of singers is the style in which she sings. Just a beautiful line of poetry, for example. You or I might read it and sort of hear the meter of how it would sound, coming out of somebody normal. But because Elizabeth was extraordinary, she would make that line maybe spread out over sort of 20 notes rather than the traditional 6. You know what I mean? So I just think the way she was doing it was very unique, and it probably made it harder to understand because of the style that she was singing it in. But listen, she would do one thing one day and another thing another day. There wasn't really a form to it. She was just very instinctive, very instinctive.
But various things you did discuss about the kind of principles in the group. And I remember this really well being at Smash Hits at the time, because readers just accepted that you weren't on Top of the Pops because they assumed you hadn't been offered Top of the Pops. But when they discovered you'd been offered Top of the Pops twice and had turned it down, I think they were just felt aggrieved. Do you regret now the fact that you didn't go on top of the Pops? In fact, why didn't you go on top of the Pops?
No, I don't regret it because it did make total sense at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I can understand why people now, because there's so little footage of us anywhere doing anything like, decent stuff. I can understand the sort of desire, like, well, why didn't you do that? And I get it. But the show at the time was very much about sort of pop music. It was about balloons, flashing lights, pans people, hot gossip, or whatever it was. And I don't know whether it was just we were being pretentious, or we just felt this doesn't go with that. It will just sound weird, and we'll just feel so uncomfortable, and we'll just look excruciatingly uncomfortable miming to a song. We just couldn't get our head around it, so we just said no. And it didn't seem like a big deal. It was just like, no, we couldn't possibly do that. Playing on the old Grey Whistle Test, well, we did that a couple of times, and that was a completely different experience because you're actually playing the songs.
Yeah.
But not a happy experience, certainly in one case.
No, it's not happy.
Tell that story, which we can vaguely remember.
I don't want to spoil it for anyone reading the book, but put it this way. So we turned up to do a couple of songs. I think it was April '85, something like that, and we walked in very early in the morning. It's like a stupid o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And within a few minutes of setting up, the director of the show asked us to go up on stage and just sort of play a little bit of the song, play through the song, because they wanted to get their camera angles right, and they wanted to get the lights right, so that just a little kind of dress rehearsal thing. So hop up on stage, and I can't remember why, but like Robin started playing the bass, which is not his normal instrument, and I started playing the guitar, not my normal instrument. But because the parts are quite easy, and we're both okay musicians, we just played through the song. He pressed play on the drum machine. We had this 4-track tape machine in the middle of the stage, which we always had at that point in our live set. Played the drum machine along. We start the song. We finish it. I mean, I'm literally, you can see it on the TV repeats now. I'm literally just sort of staring around the room, looking up at the lights, and just completely uninterested in proceedings. And we sort of get through the song. And then the director's like, okay, that's great. We're good. Okay, let's break for breakfast. And we're like, what do you mean? We haven't done it yet. We were just messing about. And he was like, no, it was all good. It sounded great, guys. We're good to go.
Great, guys. Great. We're happy. Good to go.
You see, this is really interesting, because that's where kind of low-key indie presentation really falls apart, isn't it? Because you can't tell the difference.
You can't tell whether you're performing or you're not performing.
When Dusty Springfield performed, you knew she was performing. Prior to that, she had her hair in rollers or whatever. You know what I mean? Yeah. There was definite transition. Definitely. Whereas yours was so downplayed, wasn't it? Here we are with a reel-to-reel tape player going, it's like we've shown you the back of the engine.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously it didn't go well. It didn't end prettily, and in fact, it ended with us not being invited back to any BBC live event for, I don't know, maybe like what was that, 85? So like 11 years or something.
10 years, you said.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I can remember seeing you play around that time and being amazed by the fact that, because you had the tape recorder, if there was an encore or whatever, you'd have to press a button and you'd have to rewind the tape and find the point on the tape where you could then start that song. It seemed so funny and quite clunky, really.
Oh, so clunky. It would never happen now because, with samples and stuff, you just literally go to the song before and press play, and it's instantaneous. And maybe only a few years later, we would be able to do that. But right back then in the mid 80s, it was the tape machine or nothing. And because we sort of felt like, well, we can't pre-plan an encore because that just seems ridiculously conceited and arrogant. Yeah. So we didn't do that. But as you say, we'd have to kind of press rewind and then hope that when you press stop and play, it was going to be the song you wanted it to be. Because, how can you see in the dark?
Or you'd start a quarter of the way through it.
It would be Baby's first word or something like that, or a Spurs game or something.
Oh God, yeah, please don't. Which is probably why we tried not to get encores as often as possible because it was
couldn't deal with it.
No, it was just too much stress.
That's so Cocteau Twins to be trying not to get encores. So much of you. In fact, there's a real feeling that you don't ever want to finish a record. You're just happy in the studio in this little warm cocoon of creativity, and what you don't really like is the promotional bit, going out and having to sell it and perform it and all that.
Is that true? Go on.
Yeah, pretty much true. Really. I mean, I think I've still never really been a comfortable performer on stage. I do still find the whole thing quite awkward. I just feel like I'm facing the wrong way. I should be facing the same way that the audience is. So I do. Liz is definitely a nervous performer, but I think when you're up there and you're with your friends and you're traveling around the world, you do realize that this is a beautifully privileged thing to be doing, and you do get into it. Certainly the first few years was a bit nerve-wracking, but as we became more popular, I think we did start to enjoy it more.
Well, we've got to ask you about the incident I mentioned at the top, actually, which is just phenomenal. It's pretty much the end of the Cocteau Twins. It may have contributed, in fact, to the end of the Cocteau Twins. But you're at the Lollapalooza Festival playing to 40,000 people in America. Just remind us again of the bill and the position in the bill that the Cocteau Twins appeared.
Yes, it's an incongruous bill. There's no doubt about that. And the reason we did it, because a lot of people would be like, why did they do it? So I'll tell you the bill. It was, I think there were some bands before Rancid, but Rancid was the first one I remember. Rancid.
There were some bands before Rancid.
There were some bands before Rancid, but I can't remember who they were. So this is maybe the main stage bill was Rancid, the Ramones, Cocteau Twins, and Joey Ramone did make a comment during his set that suggested that he wasn't happy going on before us, but that's another story. Yeah. So Rancid, the Ramones, Cocteau Twins, Soundgarden, Metallica. So we definitely are the sort of odd one out.
But you were on there because I think Metallica really liked you, didn't it? Kurt Hamnick went on and made a sort of speech beforehand. Tell us that.
Yeah, he was a massive fan. And so our booking agent was the guy that started Lollapalooza with Perry Farrell, right? So they sort of concocted this idea of this sort of touring festival. And Metallica were the headliners that year. And they asked us to go on the whole tour. And I don't know how many shows it was, probably, 20 shows. And it toured around the US. And when we first got asked, we were like, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. That's a crazy bill. We would stink the place out every night. Clearly, that's the wrong audience. And we said no. Like they kept coming back saying the band really love you. Kurt Hammett's a massive fan. You're his favorite band. Blah 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 blah. So the agent Mark, a lovely guy, he just wouldn't let go. He was so relentless, And in the end, I think really just to shut him up, because every time he came and see us on tour, he'd be like, so are you going to do it? And we'd be like, no, we already said no. Stop asking us. So in the end, we just said, Mark, we'll do it. We'll do one show. That's all you're getting. We'll do the opening night. And then will you just please leave us alone? So he was like, okay, that's amazing. Thank you. And the opening night, of course, happened to be in Kansas City, probably not the best place to say yes to. So anyway, the day comes along. We arrive at the festival. Kirk Hammett comes into our trailer and is very lovely and effusive and just says the kindest things and says, is it all right if I go out on stage, before you guys, just to say a few words, introduce the band to our crowd because some of them may not know you. And we're like, yeah, go for it, break a leg. So he goes out and he gives it the big and, the best fucking band in the whole world. And so the crowd were like, wow. And we walk out on stage to sort of rapturous applause. And then, we play the first song, and then the first song finishes and everyone's like, well, maybe sort of half the audience are like, yeah, because Kirk loves this, right? So yeah, it's great. And then another couple of songs in and they're like, what is that?
Are they rewinding a tape recorder?
Yeah, it's a really sort of, it's dawning on us that this is really failing. And then the power goes right in the middle of the song. So that's not good. At this point, we're not using we're not using tape machines. We're using samplers, and we actually have 2 drummers at this point. So we've got the personnel to pull off a song. But unfortunately, when all the power goes, you're kind of screwed. So we had to stand on stage uncomfortably while whatever was going wrong was fixed. And that, if it's ever more than about 30 seconds, that's an awful long time when there's 40,000 people staring at you at 2:00 in the afternoon sun, in Kansas City. It was just really uncomfortable. So eventually they fixed it. But then the next song we were supposed to play, this is the regret, is that we had a piano ballad in the set, and that was really where the whole thing fell flat, I think.
Piano ballad.
I went to sit down at the piano, and as I was sitting down, I thought, God, I just really don't think this is a good idea, and started playing this song. And then as we started, these mud balls, because it was just sort of like, there were no bottles to throw, I guess. It was just mud pies. People were making these really hard, like snowball kind of things and chucking them on the stage. And a few landed near me. I think one hit Ben, the other guitarist, on the leg. And then right in the middle of this piano ballad, one hit Elizabeth square between the eyes. And at that point, she was just like, goodbye.
Yeah, which is fair enough.
Yeah, it's absolutely fair enough. And to be honest, I think she saved us from a lot of fate worse than death, really. So
it would have been bottles next.
It would have, maybe. And we got back to the trailer like just a bit fried with the whole thing. And Kurt came in and was like, "Oh my God, guys, I'm so sorry. I really feel terrible." He was as sweet as pie,
Yeah.
And we just sort of got out of there as quickly as we could, because there's very little point staying around at that point. It
was the agent there?
I can't remember that.
Couldn't see him for dust.
I think he probably was hiding in the background.
Oh, that's a classic.
It's an amazing story.
I mean,
Rancid, the Ramones, the Cocteau Twins, Simon Raymonde, Metallica.
Yeah, I mean,
so based on your experience at home, being out there with the Cocteau Twins and so forth, you're running your own label and dealing with loads of bands. Is there any stuff you tell them to avoid catastrophes occurring to them? Is there anything from your experience that benefits them?
Every day, I like to think that I have the capacity to pass on that information.
If anybody's interested in hearing it.
Well, that's the thing, because really a lot of these things don't happen until they happen, you know what I mean? And it's by then any advice that yes, I could have told you all about that. It's too late by then. But certainly I do have some wisdoms from these past experiences that might be of use to bands. But I mean, we do manage a lot of artists, so I do get to talk about stuff generally, and then of course if bands feel comfortable, they'll not ask me my opinion on things, or if I've got any thoughts about it. But yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody could have foreseen that.
No, sure. Do you think, generally speaking, bands are less naive nowadays than they were? Yes,
100%. They are less naive about just general businessy things like contracts, about ways to release their music. Because, I have to think back to the early 80s. There was nothing. This is pre-mobile phone, pre-computer, pre-CD even. It was just like vinyl and cassettes, wasn't it? So, there was nothing else to do as a music. There was nothing to do as a teenager other than go to the cinema, go to gigs, go to the pub. What else is there to do? Or go to a play, I suppose, if you were into the theatre. There wasn't games. There wasn't all this other stuff. So I think bands are just a lot more, and just generally teenagers and kids are just so much more advanced than I was. So much more mature, not maybe emotionally mature, but just mature in the sense of how to deal with, a music business, because you can read about everything on the internet. You can watch every music documentary, and they all do. All the young bands we work with, they're all like, have you seen this? They know everything about music. Their taste,
and none of them would be embarrassed about talking about money, because you talk in the book in great detail about the fact that the Cocteau Twins were really embarrassed. You felt that you were there. It was a form of art, and any conversation about even a fiver for a cab was sort of being, as you put it, a breadhead, and was kind of antithetical to the whole concept of what the Cocteau Twins are about, that's a really good example of naivety, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, just the contracts we signed are just really poor. You wouldn't get away with offering a contract to a band like that these days. So, back then you was like, a lawyer? What would you need a lawyer for? These guys are cool. They signed all these great bands. Let's just sign it. Let's get on with it.
These guys are cool.
Just want to make a record and get on with our lives. I think bands are definitely not quite the same anymore. They're not quite as just so desperate to get on with their music career that they would actually sign something that could put them in jeopardy for the rest of their lives. They're a lot smarter, which is a great thing. And I tell every band, I know it's going to cost you a few £100 to get some legal advice, but 100% you should, just to protect yourself from something bad happening. So I think kids are just so much wiser. They have so much greater music taste. There's 15-year-old kids that have wider music taste than I had in my 30s, let alone in my teenage years, and that's a really beautiful thing that's come out of the last couple of decades for sure.
So what are you working on now?
Well, so this studio here that you see me in, I haven't really been in it for a couple of years because of the book and, a bunch of different things going on with the label. So I'm thinking that probably it's about time to start making some new music, because I haven't done it since the last Lost Horizons album, which came out in I think 2021, something like that. So I really feel like that's going to be the next thing that my body tells me I need to do, because writing a book is a really very interesting thing for me to do, and I'm so glad I did it. I didn't think I had it in me a few years ago. I wasn't even interested, to be honest. Had no desire to be write a musician's autobiographies. I generally find those things a bit dull. So I really loved the process. I learned a lot about myself, I suppose. I learned a lot about my dad through the research. I felt a lot closer to him as a result of the book. I felt like all the things that I thought were so different about us were actually pretty much the same. So for me, the writing of the book was a really, really positive thing, and I enjoyed every second of it. I'm sure you boys have been putting books out for years, so the publishing game. It is very different to the music business, and I do find some of the elements of it very slow. I mean, I know putting records out can be slow, but putting a book out, oh my days, it's so slow. It's the editing.
It's quicker than it was on time.
The editing, the fact checking, the legals.
Yeah, my God, everything was just so slow and drawn out. But I still enjoyed it because it was all new. And my publisher, 98 Books, is the guy that runs it. Pete Selby is such a nice chap, and he really helped me through those times where I was like, how should we do this? Where should this bit go? Like the Simon Raymonde section in the book is a really great example of how I really needed somebody with some sage advice who's got a career in publishing that understands, the storytelling thing. Yeah. And he, we talked about it a load. He was umming and ahhing about where the Simon Raymonde bit should go, but he felt it should definitely not go at the beginning, which is where I perhaps had thought it should go because of, he's my dad. Chronologically, he would have
slowed it up.
Yeah, he said you've got to start with got
to start with famous people.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't start with famous people, but I started with the significant event in my life that would draw people in, and he loved that bit. And he said that's the place to start. Very early on, I knew that was where to start, but the Simon Raymonde bit he thought shouldn't be till much later in the book, and I didn't really get that for a while because I was like, but how do we deal with that? Because he's my dad, and his life is earlier than mine. Shouldn't we just chronologically? And he was like, no, you don't need to do that. So we found
it's an amazing section of the book. I mean, there's a bit I was talking to Dave about yesterday. There's a bit in that where your father gets which we haven't got time to get into now, actually, but he takes the QE2 in 1949 to go to America, playing in a jazz band to Hedy Lamarr and Jack Benny and stuff in the first class lounge, and he gets off in America and just doesn't go to bed for 36 hours, goes to Birdland, buys clothes, eats steaks, in rationing Britain. It would make a movie.
It was such a brilliant part of the book for me to tell that story because, as I'm hearing it for the first time on these audio tapes, I'm like, wow, this is just gold dust, Like he arrived in New York the day Birdland opened.
Mm-hmm.
So get your head around that. So he's seeing, his heroes, and he was a complete jazz freak back then. That was all he wanted to be, was a jazz musician. And he arrives, and, all the boys in the band, they managed to get themselves in somehow to this first night. And, they're sitting there with all the legends of jazz music of the day. And that was a really fascinating thing for me, because I didn't know that about my dad. I didn't know it.
Well, it's fantastic. And
there's all there in the book.
Yeah, it's all in the book.
So many stories. And also an amazing insight, I think. It's just what it's like being on the inside of a group and looking out, how the outside world works and how the inside world often doesn't work, actually. It's quite dysfunctional. It's really revealing. It's a fantastic book, Simon. And it is freely available. Thank you very much for talking to us. It's called In One Ear.